When you're playing jazz solos and working on your improvisations, then most of the time you're going to be playing eighth note lines. That's sort of the basic subdivision that we work with in jazz. But as you'll hear in the examples that I'm gonna cover in this video, it really pays off to also add some embellishments and some different variations to your eighth note lines, just to change things up so you sound a little bit more like an interesting melody and a little bit less like a machine gun. The examples that I'm going to cover in this video are all beautiful examples of bebop lines that are both melodic and also really good examples of how you add different, especially rhythmical embellishments to your eighth note lines. And this is stuff you can easily start adding to your own playing, and that can really make a huge difference in how your solo sounds as a whole. My name is Jens Larsen. Learn jazz, make music. This example is from Dexter Gordon's solo on Confirmation, and it's the beginning of an A part. It's a really great example of how he uses embellishments in his lines. There are two things I want to talk about in this. In general, I think you want to check out Dexter for somebody who's pretty traditional. He really plays mostly eighth note based lines, but he does that really well, and he also uses some really nice groupings and, as you will see in this example, some nice embellishments. The first thing I want to talk about is what Dexter is playing in the second half of the F major 7 bar, targeting the first note on the E half diminished. So he's targeting this F that he's playing, that's making a part of a B flat major triad that he's using on top of the E half diminished. And he's playing an enclosure where he's also adding an eighth note triplet. So we get this enclosure of E and then moving up to G, just using half steps in between, so going back down to the E and then coming out on the F here. So this way of breaking up an eighth note line is actually something that's on guitar very often quite easy to do, and also quite easy to use. The only thing you need to be aware of is that when you're using this, you kind of want to have the top note here in the scale. So that means that you can use it whenever you have a whole step above your target note. So I could do this also if I'm thinking from F. I could do this on the C as well. But on the A, it gets a little bit strange because I have this target note in there. Sometimes it will work anyway, but you have to be a little bit more careful with it. But you can of course also use this on sort of the other main functions in F. So you could do this targeting the third of G minor, or the fifth of C7. So there are a lot of places you can put this to use. In the next part of the phrase, Dexter Gordon is using a trill to really emphasize the alterations on the A7 in bar 2. So the way he does this is that he's coming out on the sharp 9 here, going down to the root, and then we get the B flat and then a quick turn on the sharp 9, so the flat 9 and then the sharp 9, and then a pull off to resolve that down to the fifth of D minor 7. So, and this way of really sort of making the alteration stand out is something that works really well. It's also quite traditional for bebop, and definitely something you want to check out using. Of course, when you execute this on guitar, the best way to do this, or the easiest way to do this, is to do that with pull-off. So, and here you can of course find uses for it like that, but you could also use it again on a, for instance, G minor 7. So. Clifford Brown is really one of the best when it comes to playing melodic bebop lines, and this short example from his solo on Joy Spring I think illustrates that really well, because he's playing on some fairly busy changes, but at the same time you can tell that he's really playing some very strong melodic statements using fairly simple devices, but also managing to have a lot of freedom on top of those busy changes. The first part of the line is really an enclosure pointing towards an F major triad. So we get this melody, which in this case kind of seems to work as an enclosure. And I don't know where Peter Bernstein got this from. It could very well be that he got this from Clifford, but he uses this phrase really a lot, pointing towards this note. And then we get a descending F major triad, coming out on the B flat minor, and then a scale run in the B flat minor melodic. So that's really just thinking 4 minor here. So, and then we get sort of the variation of the embellishment part of this line, which is a triplet rhythm that's spread out across actually 3 chords and goes like this. So what he's doing is that he's just making the last part of the 8th note line, and actually also the resolution to A minor, an 8th note triplet running down the A minor triad, and then adding another triplet, coming out on the D on the A flat 7 or D7 altered. Most of the time when you encounter 8th note triplets in bebop lines, then they're used to either play arpeggios or to connect 8th note lines. So you don't really have a lot of sort of more free triplet rhythms like we have here, where it's not going from beat to beat, but where the last one is actually an anticipation. So, and the same goes for the next one, of course. But there are some examples of this, and I suspect that Clifford actually got this from Charlie Parker, because he has one example where we get this. And here Parker is using a very similar device to get the alterations out and also have the C on the forehand. So, and then finally resolving on the 2 of the bar instead of on the 1. Sonny Stitt is really one of the best places to go if you want to learn some solid bebop vocabulary. I think his lines are just all really great bebop lines, and he's using all the things you need to check out if you want to learn how to play bebop. And I think this example, which is just essentially a 2-5-1 in G major from his solo on Ornithology, is no exception. I'm not really going to focus on the line itself, but you should certainly check it out. It's a great line, and there are great things in there that you can learn a lot from playing. But I'm going to focus on the embellishment at the end of the 2-5-1 line, where he's using an arpeggio that is kind of spelling out an altered dominant. The idea behind this embellishment is actually using a 16-note triplet, and this kind of embellishment is fairly common in jazz and in bebop, but mostly you'll find it sort of more in a scale context than in an arpeggio context. So I think the most common version of this would be something like what Grant Green plays in blues solos very often. That would be something like this. So here we just have sort of a 16-note triplet, and then moving down to the next scale note under it. But what Sonny Stitt is doing here is kind of similar, but he's using this arpeggio, which is a C half diminished arpeggio. So that's the arpeggio from the flat 7 on an altered dominant, and that's really giving us the flat 9 and the flat 13, and then just the basic notes of the dominant. And what he does here is that he's making this trill between the root and the 7th of that arpeggio, so that's actually the flat 13 and the flat 7 of the D7, and then down the arpeggio, and then resolving to B. And this is something that you can use on other arpeggios as well. Wes sometimes does this on minor 7 arpeggios, and of course you can also experiment with using it on major 7 arpeggios, like this. It's really just a great phrase that you can put in there, and you can use to just make descending arpeggios sound a little bit more interesting and just break up the flow a little bit. If you want to check out some more videos where I'm analyzing bebop phrases and talking about how you can add those kind of things to your own playing, then check out this short playlist where I'm analyzing some solos from Charlie Parker and Sonny Stitt and Sonny Rollins.